Without further ado, I would like to introduce today's speaker, Mr. Paul Davidson. He is the current president of the Association of Universities of Colleges of Canada, and he was first given a 5-year term in May of 2009, but his term has recently been renewed until May of 2017, so obviously he's doing something right in his current job. Mr. Davidson was appointed Executive Director of World University Service of Canada in 2002. There he pursued strategic partnerships with the Center for International Studies and Cooperation and Farm Radio International that attracted national and international attention for their innovation and impact. Prior to joining the World University Service of Canada, Mr. Davidson spent 7 years in Canadian book publishing, including 5 years as Executive Director of the Association of Canadian Publishers. In the early 1990s, Mr. Davidson led the Toronto office of the government relations firm S.A. Murray Consulting, following 3 years at Queen's Park, where he served as a political advisor to Ontario's Leader of the Opposition, Treasurer, and Deputy Premier. Mr. Davidson holds an MA from Queen's University, where he studied Southern African history, and a BA from Trent University, where he was in the first class of the Trent International Program. To that end, his overseas experience includes assignments in Ecuador, Kenya, and Zimbabwe. Today, Mr. Davidson will be speaking on the value of arts and sciences in a globalizing world. So please give him a warm welcome. Thank you.
Well, merci beaucoup, Valérie. C'est un grand plaisir d'être parmi vous aujourd'hui, ici à Montréal. Probablement, si tout le monde est bilingue ici au Canada, et la réponse est non. Donc, le reste de ma présentation sera en anglais. I really want to thank you all for coming to Montreal. This is the city that I was born in. It's a city that I love. And while the program that you have put together is extraordinary, I encourage you all to play hooky. To find a session, go to the business meeting, But find a session that you could probably get notes from a friend. And instead, take a 5-minute walk to Old Montreal. Or take a 20-minute run up Mount Royal and look at the St. Lawrence River. Or, if evening pleasures your fun, go to the Boulevard Saint-Laurent, where you see Anglophone culture, Francophone culture, and world culture fuse in a way that is simply extraordinary. So take advantage of being here in Montreal, and welcome, and thank you for inviting me to be with you. It is really good to be with you today. As a representative of Canada's universities, I have to say we are watching with great concern the situation in the United States. The United States has been a beacon. The United States has been a magnet. The United States has been a model for investments in higher education. And when you suffer, we all suffer. So we are greatly concerned. When I saw Terry's presentation this morning, I can provide you a slightly different interpretation of events in Canada. But I will also say that it's terribly important that the United States succeed. I say that not just out of parochial interest, but 80% of our trade does flow between Canada and the United States. Your success is our success, and we want to wish you all the best in pulling through this difficult time. Let me bring greetings from Canada's 95 universities and degree-granting colleges. Not as many as the United States, but I can assure you it is a diverse and dynamic cohort of higher education institutions. In fact, just last week, our membership was meeting here in Montreal to celebrate our 100th anniversary. It has been a century of growth, dynamism, and diversity, and we were able to underscore the important role that universities play in building a strong society, a strong economy, and a strong country. Now already, in just my few hours with you today, I've had a few questions asked of me. The first is, what about this red thing? This is a Canadian symbol that we wear in advance of November 11th, which in Canada is known as Remembrance Day, where we mark and honor all those who fell in service of Canada and in service of liberty. On the 11th, hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. And so if you have the opportunity, you will see Canadian veterans selling these poppies, offering these poppies for a contribution. And Valerie, I will offer this to you a little later, but one of the things that politicians do is they always keep an extra one in their pocket because they tend to fall out. So I'm pleased to offer this to you, Valerie. The other question I'm often asked is, how are things in Canada? And I'll give you a Canadian response. On the whole, all things considered, not too bad. It would be un-Canadian of me to be boastful, but I can say that our economy was the last into the recession and it was the first out. I can say that our fiscal situation is such that our debt to GDP ratio is the best amongst the G7. I can say that our banks survived the financial crisis without the need for public support. And I can say that jobs are returning to Canada. In fact, we did go through a period of job loss, but we have recovered all the jobs that have been lost through the recession. And for the first time in a generation, more than a generation, the unemployment rate in Canada is lower than that in the United States. Again, it would be un-Canadian to be boastful, so I don't say that as... And I also promised that these remarks would not become a recruiting pitch to come to Canada. You're always welcome. I haven't even gotten my prepared remarks yet, but I'm going to leave you one more conference tip, because in my estimation, the value of a good conference is if you come away with one good idea or one good book suggestion, then it's been a good few days. And Valerie noted I spent 7 years in Canadian book publishing, and I do want to commend a book to you. It was written by an American, published by an American publisher, but it is about a profoundly important Canadian subject. The book is called Champlain's Dream. It was written by David Hackett Fisher, published a couple of years ago now. Samuel de Champlain was a French explorer who became the first governor of New France. As a child, he grew up in Europe in a period of religious conflict. He grew up in a harbor town where he heard and learned languages as a youth. He set out to, quote unquote, discover the new world. But his dream was not to conquer or to invade. His dream was, frankly, to interact with the people he found here. And I mention that for two reasons. Because Champlain came to this island of Montreal 400 years ago and interacted supremely well with Canada's First Peoples. And I would argue that it was his appreciation of language, his appreciation of intercultural skills, the desire to act under rule of law, and the desire to build a peaceful new world that drove his dream for North America. I commend the book to you, not only because it's a fascinating reinterpretation of history, but also because it speaks about how Champlain traveled across the borders of Canada and the US 400 years ago. Because that underscores the enduring partnership that Canadians and Americans have had these 400 years. So there's a few suggestions about how to get out of the conference hotel and see Montreal, and a good book suggestion. And if your eyes glaze over now, I'm okay with that. But let me turn to the prepared remarks and say that speaking on behalf of the AUCC, I hope that I can contribute to your upcoming discussions by providing a perspective that is close to your own, yet somewhat different. Just as Canada is close to the US, but somewhat different. Where you say restroom, we say washroom. When I say university, you can hear college. But I trust that we will understand each other. The topic I wish to address is the role of arts and sciences in our increasingly globalized world. This is a subject that I am passionate about both personally and professionally. I've welcomed you to Montreal, but let me welcome you to a foreign country, Canada. I understand that you have twice met before, holding your annual meetings in our country, 11 years ago in Toronto and 6 years ago in Vancouver. And yes, the dollar worked in your favor then. I trust the fact that you're here means that you've enjoyed your previous trips across the border, but this trip has been a little different and in an important way. I'm not referring to the fact that today you're in Quebec, where the principal language is in French, toutefois le fait que le français est la langue officielle ici au Québec, et que vous l'entendez parler dans une saveur internationale à la réunion de cette année. I'm not referring to the language differences, but I'm referring to the fact that this year, in order to attend the meeting of the Council of Culture, you not only needed your passport, you had to have one. That's a profound change in recent years. You might have carried your passport when you came to Toronto or to Vancouver, but it wasn't mandatory. A driver's license or a birth certificate would have sufficed, but not this time. You used to be able to get along pretty well without a passport in North America, but no longer. And the same is true for the value of liberal arts and sciences. A liberal arts education has always been a passport to a larger world. The manifest skills and inner resources that a liberal arts education cultivates prepares us to navigate a larger, unpredictable, and rapidly changing world. In today's interconnected, knowledge-based economy, that's not just nice to have, it's essential. The case for arts and sciences in a time of globalization is really the same case that most of us have been making for the liberal arts all along, only more so. An education in the liberal arts and sciences fosters critical thinking, interdisciplinary learning, discovery, collaboration, communication, the confidence to respond to challenge, and the ability to react to change. The world our current graduates are encountering is one in which the economic, social, and personal fulfillment depend not only on what they have been taught, but to greater and greater extents upon their ability to continually learn. This ability to inquire, learn, communicate, and adapt is a hallmark of a solid grounding in the arts and sciences. Let me suggest this to you, that the future is a foreign country. No one knows for certain what the jobs of the future will be, where they will be located, or what mix of languages they'll be speaking. What we do know is that our world is being shaped by international, quickly moving, and interconnected forces. Those who are well prepared to thrive in this new reality will have knowledge of other countries, languages, and cultures, and an ability to establish partnerships and work productively with colleagues from around the world. This is the kind of passport that the arts and sciences can and should be offering to graduates. A discovery-enriched, globally engaged learning experience marked by what's been called educational connectivity, networks of learnings. This is my professional opinion, and it reflects the direction of Canada's university presidents, as last week during our own meeting here in Montreal to mark our 100th anniversary. I might add that the reason we celebrated our 100th anniversary last week was that in 1911, Canada's university presidents came together in advance of a meeting to be held in 1912. That meeting was of the Congress of the Universities of the British Empire. In 1911, the British Empire covered 2/3 of this planet. What a difference 100 years makes. Circumstances change. We have to be able to respond to those changes. So it's my professional opinion the value of arts and sciences has never been greater, but it's also my personal experience. Exposure to the larger world in university changed my life. Valerie gave a very nice introduction and read some elements of my biography. She mentioned that I was a student of the Trent International Program some 25 years ago. The offer then was to do well in your first 2 years of study, and then you could study anywhere in the world. You could pick the university, and the university would find a way to get you in. Now, I like to joke that I started trying to get into Aberdeen, and I was accepted at Zimbabwe. But in fact, Zimbabwe was my first choice, because Zimbabwe was a newly independent country. They had just thrown off the shackles of colonialism from the British and from the government of Rhodesia. And so I went as an undergraduate student to Harare, where I lived in residence with the first generation of African students who until years earlier had been fighting in the bush for their independence, where I learned from professors who had fled apartheid South Africa, and where I acquired the skills that have served me throughout my career. That year changed my life. It laid the foundation for my graduate work, and 15 years later, it brought me back to Africa, where as Executive Director of World University Service of Canada, I spent time in Dadaab, a refugee camp in northeast Kenya, housing hundreds of thousands of refugees. There I witnessed the incredible tenacity of people to invest in education. Now I have to go off the script for a moment and describe Dadaab if you're not familiar with it. Dadaab is a refugee camp in northeast Kenya that was built in 1990 as a temporary solution to a refugee problem. It was built to have a capacity of 100,000 people. All these years later, its population is 400,000, and by Christmas it will be 500,000. The world has paid periodic attention to the situation in Dadaab, but I can tell you, visiting the refugees in that refugee camp, that they are investing everything they have in education. And I asked them why. Why in an environment of so much loss and deprivation would they be trying to create schools and trying to encourage their students to pursue post-secondary education? And they told me very candidly, they had walked for months from their homes. They had left behind all their material possessions. They had been robbed of their future, but their hope was that their children would succeed, because nobody can take their education away. I tell this story not only because it's part of my experience, but also to illustrate the fact that no matter who you are or where you are, whether you are an emerging superpower or a disenfranchised refugee, the strategy is the same. Invest in education. It's the first priority. It's the one thing whose value will never diminish. Now, Canada and the United States have enjoyed an abundance of natural resources, but the United States is a superpower, and Canada enjoys its favorable position among world economies, not just because we exploit natural resources, but because we invest in human resources. For decades, the US and Canada have sat at the top of the charts in terms of university and college enrollment, and also the attainment of degrees. It should not surprise us then that the rest of the world should borrow from our playbook. In the 21st century, the world's emerging nations are investing heavily in higher education. This year, for the first time in our history, Canada has 1 million undergraduate students currently enrolled in university. Recently, China increased its university enrollment by 1 million students, and they accomplished that in 12 months. South Korea, you know South Korea, the ones whose cars we weren't so sure with their quality that we could buy. Well, they now lead the world in the percentage of its youth enrolled in university. And in India, I was meeting with the Minister of Human Resources and Skills Development in India precisely 1 year ago today. He needs to have an economic strategy that will create 20 million jobs a year for a decade, just to satisfy the 18 to 24-year-old cohort. And to do that, he is building 1,300 new universities in the next decade. Turning our attention a little closer to home, in Brazil will be a top 5 global economy within the next 5 years, and their president, President Dilma, recently announced that her government would provide 75,000 university scholarships for Brazilian students to study abroad, with another 25,000 scholarships expected to come from Brazil's private sector. That's a lot of investment in education. Now, it can be tempting to interpret the information such as this as evidence of a kind of global educational arms race and see it as a threat to our nation's competitive advantage. While that reaction is understandable, I would rather encourage you to look at the situation a little differently. First, this is unquestionably powerful evidence that the strategy of investing in higher education is still valid and still potent in our current environment. We have only to look to our global neighbors to see this strategy being validated. Second, it's not a threat, but it's an opportunity. The whole world is waking up to the value of education in a globalized, knowledge-driven economy. We in Canada and the US are looking at a window of opportunity to engage with the blossoming of higher education internationally, to build enduring people-to-people linkages and institutional partnerships, and to enrich the learning experiences of our own students within our own institutions. Let me say this again. The future is a foreign country. The world that our graduates will thrive in will be one marked by a large, diverse, widely dispersed international population of highly educated men and women who are capable of navigating many languages and cultures, establishing partnerships and networks with international colleagues, and addressing issues that cross borders. Our graduates will need to speak these languages, collaborate with these people, and engage these issues. These skills will open up larger worlds to these graduates and give them entrance into them. These skills will be their passport. This is the kind of passport that the arts and sciences are ideally suited to provide. And these are the kinds of learning experience towards which those of us in the arts and sciences should be directing our resources and our creativity. Now at this point, and particularly after hearing Terry's presentation this morning, we're facing some significant challenges to our ability to adapt and to capitalize on these opportunities. Both we here in Canada and you in the United States face two different forces that impede our ability to adapt and change. One is complacency, and the other is austerity. Complacency says that we already have great educational systems. We sit at the top of the heap. What others are doing doesn't really concern us. We just need to keep funding and administering what has always worked for us. To this, I quote that great American Will Rogers: "Even if you're on the right track, you'll get run over if you just sit there." Austerity, on the other hand, says that we're in a time of financial crisis, and we simply can't afford to fund anything as elite or impractical as a liberal arts education. College is too expensive. We need to put people to work right now. Wasn't that shocking when Terry said that the solution is for the economy to improve so that we don't have to put so many people through higher education? That's not a recipe for success. That's not a recipe for success. To this, I try to point out that even during the recent recession, and even as Canada was losing jobs across the economy, there were in fact significant new jobs for university graduates. Now again, it's hard to compare numbers between Canada and the US because you're so much larger. But during our recession, there were 430,000 jobs lost to those with no PSE, no post-secondary credential. At the same time, there were over 330,000 new jobs, net new jobs created for those who have a university degree. And as we were talking at lunch, we can fight evidence, or we can fight anecdote with evidence, but we've got to marshal it even more sharply because people need to hear that. They need to understand that. Perhaps the most insidious form of resistance to change in liberal arts and sciences education comes when austerity joins complacency and fuels attacks on education. The attack takes the form of an argument that universities, while nice enough, are an expensive frill that doesn't address current needs or pay back its investment. Actually, we did a recent study that showed that about 24% of Canadians are university degree holders. They contribute 44% of the tax revenues in this country. So we more than pay back. They also use less than 15% of the resources that government provides. So we more than pay back. But a recent and typical example of this kind of attack was published last week in the New York Times, an op-ed column by Michael Ellsberg entitled "Will Dropouts Save America?" It points to Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, each college dropouts, as a way of saying that American universities are good at producing lawyers, but can't produce an entrepreneur. Ellsberg says that what people need in order to start up and succeed in business are skills like sales, networking, creativity, and comfort with failure. He goes on to say that you don't learn these skills crouched over a desk studying for a multiple choice exam. You learn them outside the classroom, talking to fellow human beings, face to face. It would be easy to simply dismiss this argument. It sets up an absurdly simplistic and false straw man sitting in for higher education. But I'd rather pick up on what Ellsberg praises as a way of thinking about what liberal arts and sciences education can and should be doing in our changing times. Sales, networking, creativity, comfort with failure, engaging outside the classroom with fellow human beings. These are all important hallmarks of a great and valuable learning experience. While they are already part of a liberal education, I suggest that we can and should be doing more of this. Over the past year, Canada's university presidents have been thinking long and hard about the role of higher education in this globalizing world. And they have realized that the success of our institutions, the success of our students, of our communities, and of our countries depends on our ability to hold fast to the enduring values of higher education, while at the same time making some fundamental changes in how we realize those values. Traditionally, the university mission is described as having three pillars: teaching, research, and community engagement. Most critics of the arts and sciences tend to see these as separate, and they focus on the teaching element in isolation. Teachers just aren't doing the job they should be. Students aren't learning what they should be learning. In fact, we see these three university missions as inseparable and converging. So, for example, members of the AUCC are focusing on learning rather than teaching. We're moving to incorporate more research into the undergraduate learning experience, and we're addressing community engagement not just as one-way service to our surrounding community, but as a dynamic relationship in which universities engage in local, regional, national, and international communities. These communities, in turn, transform universities, shaping their teaching and research, bringing new ideas and insights to address real-world issues. We're challenging ourselves to think broadly about the kinds of places students learn and to offer them opportunities as undergraduates to learn through conducting their own research, to engage in open conversations with diverse community members, to listen, to sell their ideas, and yes, to become familiar with failure and grow resilient in the face of it. We're looking for more and more opportunities for undergraduates to collaborate with each other, with faculty, with graduate students, with service groups, communities, governments, and with business in meaningful research that enables them together not only to absorb knowledge, but also to create new knowledge, to create new solutions. I was really interested in some of the statistics that were presented this morning in Terry's talk, and I'll just share a few with you in the Canadian context. Again, this is not a recruiting pitch, but over the past 15 years, enrollment in Canadian universities has increased by 60%, 60. Government support for operating costs has doubled. Government support for investments in research has increased fourfold. That's a pretty impressive track record. But we see important trends developing in our country and around the world, and we need to respond to those. We see a surging need to engage beyond our borders, both with talented individuals and with international institutions of higher learning. In particular, we see great opportunities for collaboration for mutual benefit between Canada and the United States. Again, at lunch, we were talking about the number of activities that are going on below the ground, below the radar, and we need to highlight and accentuate these collaborations that are underway. Let's agree together that we live in a larger world and that the best thing we can do for our nation's future is to cultivate a generation of curious, resilient, creative, and engaged global citizens, citizens with valid passports for the future. We can and will do this, in part by studying the world, with a strong curriculum in international studies, languages, and the many important issues that cross borders, like healthcare, immigration, sustainability, drug policy, and economics. But study alone is not sufficient. Global citizenship requires authentic global experience. I can attest to this from my own experience, and I dare say that my story is one of millions. Study abroad is a tremendous opportunity, and it can be a transformative, life-changing experience. Speaking for Canada and the rest of the world, we would love to have you and your students study and learn with us. I'm well aware that overseas study is open to criticism as some kind of glorified spring break abroad. But let's be candid. A term encased in a bubble of fellow classmates arranged to be just like home is likely to be both more expensive and less transformative than a term in an unfamiliar country, more or less on your own. Culture shock is not something to be avoided, it's to be embraced. It's one of the great benefits of overseas study and an excellent preparation for the future. We can also invite the world into our place, and Canada is a growing destination for international students and researchers, where they greatly enrich our campus communities, providing not only diversity, but also connections and networks that may grow over the course of a lifetime. In other places, I've said that by accident of history, Canada has very strong links with Europe, the UK, and by accidents of geography, we've got tremendous relationships with the United States. But as a country, Canada needs to be much more intentional about pursuing relationships with the emerging economies. And international student mobility is one way of doing that, both receiving students in and sending Canadians abroad. Today, international students make up about 10% of Canada's campus population, and they contribute about $6.5 billion a year to our country's economy, a benefit over and above the ways in which they enrich the learning experience for all our students. Again, comparisons are tough, but think about if you presented to your government that you could create a $65 billion a year industry by welcoming some international students into your classroom. Technology is another way to amp up global awareness, global engagement, and global communications. Real-time joint collaborative classes, seminars, and conferences can link students, professors, researchers, and institutions. Going back to DADOB for a moment, one of the things I'm most proud about is that there's a university in Canada that has created an undergraduate class on refugee studies where they communicate in real time over the internet with the refugees in DADOB, where the refugees in DADOB convey their experiences directly to Canadian students in Canadian classrooms. Already, our faculty are collaborating internationally on their own research, and so are businesses. And network learning is a valuable skill for undergraduates, The technology is, in most cases, already in place. I've spoken about the importance of language and intercultural communication. I urge you all to fight for language instruction, particularly for non-European languages, and encourage interdisciplinary cross-cultural team learning in your curriculum. Some of our most pressing global issues are very close to home. Our global citizenship grows with every experience of listening, learning, and contributing to real-world solutions outside the comfort of our own home. It isn't hard to find diversity in the world. Some of it is very close to home. I also want to urge you to advocate for these kinds of learning experiences in the face of severely limited resources. By way of encouragement, let me offer you 3 short examples from smaller institutions across Canada. They're not blessed with an abundance of resources, a well-endowed, large endowment, or strong faculty group, a strong alumni group, but they are taking exciting measures to promote global engagement. Consider for a moment the University of Quebec à Chicoutimi. This is a small French-speaking university about 300 miles from here. It's in the heart of rural Quebec and in a city of about 60,000 people. While the university is firmly committed to serving its rural Quebec region, it is a globally minded university with students from more than 30 countries studying there, either to learn French, enroll in a bachelor's or master's or PhD program. You might hear the distinctive French accents of students from Algeria, Djibouti, France, or Morocco. But you're just as likely to hear Mandarin spoken. And the university also partners with China, Lebanon, Brazil, and Colombia. I was really struck when I visited the University of Quebec à Chicoutimi to meet a young Muslim woman engineer from Egypt pursuing her postgraduate work in French. Or to learn that this small university actually has the largest number of Chinese graduates of any Canadian university, because they've linked up a program with entrepreneurs from Chicoutimi that teach business and management studies in China. And that in turn has led to Chinese investment in Chicoutimi. Now, it's not doing this on its own, because Chicoutimi is the home of the aluminum industry in Canada, and they work in close partnership with Rio Tinto Alcan and other numerous international research collaborations. But in terms of understanding, knowledge, technology, money, and jobs, this is a pretty powerful impact on the region, on Canada, and for the world. Thompson Rivers University is a new institution just between Calgary and Vancouver in a city of about 80,000 people. It has 13,000 students, and 1,400 of them are from 80 countries around the world. It's transforming Kamloops. Or going a little further west to Vancouver Island University, where it's a small institution just recently created as a university. It had been a community college, where they have 1,200 international students studying. This in a community that's been devastated by the loss of the forestry industry, devastated by the loss of the fishing industry. Of the 1,200 international students that are studying at Nanaimo, 600 of them are living with host families and showing the power of the new global economy. Those are just 3 short examples. But let me say that during this time of financial uncertainty and global challenge, I see a great opportunity for the educational institutions of Canada and the US to work more closely together, with a view to playing important roles in the larger world that we share. On Saturday, I understand that there'll be a session on internationalizing teaching and learning through the liberal arts and sciences. So don't miss that one, don't miss the business meeting. Don't know when you're gonna get out of this hotel. Or when you're going to be able to cut that. I do want to encourage you, though, to bring your ideas and creativity to this discussion. Beyond this meeting, I want you to give you some courage and conviction, if I can, to optimize the resources at your disposal toward enhancing global engagement. There's no denying that we live in a world of heightened accountability. Living and working in this era can be frustrating, but it is our lot. You know, I'm a young person, I'm an idealistic person. I see that in some generations people went off to fight fascism. In others, they did the civil rights marches of the 1960s. In the 70s, there was the right for equal rights. And it's our lot to take on positions of leadership in an era of profound public skepticism and in an era of accountability. But that's the era that we're in. So let's make sure that we do not forget to be accountable to the future. I've often said that in a world where 500 million children do not have access to primary school, where 3 times that number do not have access to clean water, if all we're doing is setting out to achieve what we say we will achieve, we're setting our sights too low. Let me say that in a results-based world that demands accountability, that's constrained by resources, we cannot constrain our imaginations. We can do more than protect what we already have. We have to find ways to do more. Let's not forget the special responsibility that we all share in marshalling our resources of intellect and determination to bear on the world's most tenacious problems. The future is a foreign country. We will inevitably find ourselves in unfamiliar territory. That's both frightening and exciting. As stewards of higher education, it's our role and responsibility to explore that landscape. It will take all of our knowledge, skills, creativity, and experience to prepare the next generation to thrive in this larger world. Thank you very much for inviting me to be with you today. Enjoy your time in Montreal and hang on to your passport. Thank you.
And then even in smaller token, but I found this to be like my most useful gift that I ever got from CCAS, our notepad.
Perfect.
Thank you.